They say silence can speak louder than words. But when the right words are chosen, placed in the right moments, they don't just echo in the air. They live in the listener's memory. That's the essence of real communication. Not the volume, not the length, not the speed, but the weight, the presence behind each word. And that's what you're about to learn. This isn't another audiobook about public speaking tips or textbook communication hacks. This is about speaking with gravity, with depth, with the kind of clarity that doesn't need to shout to be remembered. It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't waste words and as a result becomes the kind of voice others can't ignore. So before we begin, take a moment, get quiet, tune out the noise, because this journey will take you through the art of restraint, the strength of silence, and the sharpness of every single word. And if this resonates with you, if you want more content like this, crafted for your growth and transformation, make sure to subscribe. Your voice deserves to grow. Let's begin that process, one word at a time. Chapter 1. The Power of Measured Speech. It starts with presence. Before words are ever spoken, the body speaks. Your posture, your breathing, your gaze, these are the first messages, the ones that set the tone. You can walk into a room and say nothing, but everyone knows whether you believe you belong. That's the first power of speaking less. The awareness that your presence already says something. And when your presence is confident, calm, and intentional, your words don't need to do all the work. But most people fill silence with noise. They speak because they're afraid of the space between thoughts. That fear dilutes the impact of their message. They think more is better. They think fast equals smart. They believe filling the air shows they're in control, but it often reveals the opposite. Insecurity talks too much. Insecurity needs validation in real time. Confidence waits. It lets silence sit. It trusts that the message will land when it's spoken with care. You can always tell the difference. A confident person speaks like every word matters. A scattered person speaks like they're afraid of not being heard. There's no need to rush when you trust your words will carry weight, and when you trim the excess, what remains has strength. This is where power lives, in restraint, in pause, in selection. Think of the great leaders, thinkers, and communicators you admire. Most don't ramble. They don't flood. They don't beg for attention. They speak, then wait, because they understand something most people miss. People listen more when you say less. Every time you speak, you're spending currency. Attention is finite. The more you speak without clarity, the more you devalue your voice. But when your words are rare and real, people lean in. They know you don't waste energy. They trust what comes from you is intentional. This is how influence grows, not by saying more, but by saying what matters. You don't need 100 words when one will do. You need precision, not padding. Most people speak to fill time. Persuasive minds speak to fill meaning. To speak less, but say more. You have to live a deeper life. Shallow words come from shallow minds. But when you slow down, observe more, feel more, your words start carrying the weight of your lived experience. They come from stillness. They come from seeing what others miss, and that's why they hit different. Silence becomes your ally, not your enemy. You no longer fear it, you use it. A pause isn't a stumble, it's punctuation. It's space for your words to breathe. It's the moment your listener processes and absorbs, and in that space, your message lingers. People who speak with power don't fear silence, they build it into their rhythm. There is a stillness in real authority. It doesn't rush, it doesn't fidget. It waits for the right moment to strike, and when it does, it doesn't miss. If you want to speak less but say more, you must train your instincts. Stop responding to everything. Stop trying to be seen in every conversation. Watch, listen, understand, then speak. Let your words come from your clarity, not your need to be noticed. This takes time. You will be tempted to over-explain, to justify, to defend. But that urge, it comes from the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being ignored. When you trust your voice, you no longer beg for understanding. You speak with precision, then let it land. If they get it, great. If not, that's not your job. Because clarity starts within you, not in their reaction. You are not responsible for how your truth is received. You are only responsible for making sure it is true. When your internal clarity becomes stronger than your external need for approval, you'll find your words carry a new kind of weight. They come from stillness. They land with authority. They echo longer than noise ever could. People don't remember everything you say, but they remember how your words made them feel. Were you grounded, calm? Did your words reveal wisdom? Or did they feel scattered, reactive, and rushed? That's the difference. You don't need to become someone else. You need to refine who you already are. There is power inside you. Real, steady, grounded power. But it's being drowned by noise, by too many words, by the constant pressure to say something. Let that go. Start speaking only when you have something real to say. You'll notice something strange when you do. People begin to listen. Closely. Quietly. Because they know you don't speak often. But when you do, it matters. That's not luck. That's skill. And that's what this entire journey is about. Chapter 2. Let silence speak first. Silence is uncomfortable for those who don't know themselves. That's why most people rush to speak. They fill every pause, every gap, every breath with sound, because silence forces them to feel what's beneath the noise. But those who have done the inner work, who've sat in stillness, who've stripped away the performance, those people let silence lead. And in doing so, they say more without speaking. When you learn to pause, to hold space without fear, the room changes. Conversations bend toward you. People lean in without realizing why. It's not because you spoke fast or loud. It's because you didn't need to. Needing to speak is different than choosing to speak. People who are owned by their need to be heard often sound like they're convincing themselves. There's a subtle desperation in their voice. They over-clarify, over-explain, overreach. And that overreach signals uncertainty. But when someone speaks with pause, with intention, with stillness between each phrase, it signals inner authority. It says, I'm not here to convince. I'm here to reveal. That's what real communication is, a revelation, not a performance. The world doesn't need more words. It needs more presence behind words, more weight in silence, more courage in saying nothing until something real emerges. There's something powerful about a person who doesn't rush to reply, who listens with full attention, who lets you finish, who absorbs, who considers, who only speaks when something true rises to the surface. In a culture obsessed with reaction, this kind of person is rare and unforgettable, because most people listen to respond, not to understand. But when you pause, genuinely pause, you allow meaning to form. And in that space, real connection happens. Your listener feels it. They don't feel bulldozed. They feel seen. And that feeling lingers. That's how you become memorable, not through noise but through nuance. Speaking less doesn't mean withholding. It means refining, distilling, cutting away what doesn't serve the moment. It means speaking only what's needed and trusting that what's needed is enough. That's difficult, especially when the ego wants to impress, when silence feels like failure. But it's not failure. It's strength. It's restraint. It's wisdom wearing quiet like armor. The most persuasive minds don't race, they pace. They know that a moment of pause before, during, or after a sentence adds force to the words that follow. Try this. Say something you believe, then pause. Don't explain. Don't justify, just let the silence carry it. That silence becomes your punctuation. It turns words into impact. It shows the listener that you believe what you just said, and that belief transfers. That's how influence moves. not by flooding, but by landing. But to do that, you have to develop comfort with silence. You have to befriend it, sit with it. Let it stretch longer than your instincts want. Breathe through it. Don't rush to kill it with sound. Let it breathe. Let it teach you. You'll notice something shifts when you stop fearing silence. Your words become cleaner. Your pace becomes steadier. Your message becomes stronger. Because silence trains your instincts. It sharpens your filter. You stop saying what doesn't matter. You stop reacting out of habit. You begin responding with clarity, with precision, with respect for your own voice. That's what great communicators have: respect for their own voice. They don't waste it. They don't scatter it. They treat it like currency. And because they do, others treat it with the same value. When you stop treating your voice like background noise, others stop ignoring it. This shift happens gradually, but it starts the moment you stop fearing the empty space between words. Silence is not absence. It's attention. And attention is power. Hold it. Don't let it slip by, filling it with noise. Use it wisely. Let it grow your presence. Let it prepare the room for the words that will follow. Because when you speak into silence with truth, people remember. There's a sacred rhythm in powerful communication, a cadence, a restraint, a softness. The ones who master it seem to move through language like dancers, never too early, never too late. Each word placed like a step, each pause like a breath between movements. That rhythm doesn't happen by accident. It's trained through stillness, through silence, through deep listening. That's the secret. If you want to speak less and say more, you have to listen more than you speak. Not just to others, but to yourself. You must listen to your own breath, your own energy, your own heart. You must notice when your voice rises, not from truth, but from fear. You must observe your own urge to fill space, and then gently release it. Because real confidence is not in the noise, it's in the ability to wait until the words are ready, to wait until the silence has served its purpose, to wait until your message is aligned, not just with the moment, but with who you are. That kind of presence is rare, and it is unforgettable. You walk into a room and say less, but the room feels your presence anyway. You join a conversation and speak last, but your words settle deepest. You don't rush to offer your opinion, but when you do, people pause to absorb it. That's what this journey is about. Not volume, not dominance, not cleverness, but stillness, intention, presence. To speak less, but say more. You must train your silence just as much as your speech. You must become the kind of person who doesn't fear quiet because you are quiet, not empty, not passive, but grounded, calm, observant. A storm may rage around you, but inside you stay clear. You breathe, you wait, you watch, and then, when the moment is right, you speak, and everyone listens. Chapter 3. The weight of a well-placed word. Some words vanish the moment they're spoken. Others echo long after the speaker has gone, long after the moment has passed. They hang in the air, replayed in someone's mind during quiet walks or sleepless nights. That kind of impact doesn't happen by accident. It's not about having the perfect phrase or polished vocabulary. It's about placement. And more than anything, it's about timing. In every conversation, there's a rhythm, a pulse. The words you use, or the move with that rhythm, or they crash against it. People who speak less but say more understand this rhythm instinctively. They don't interrupt it. They join it. They feel it in their breath, in their silence, in their listening. They don't speak to fill air. They speak to shape it. They wait until the moment is ready. And when they speak, they don't overload. They place words like stones in a river, altering the current just enough to redirect it. It's not about how much you say. It's about how much each word matters. Think about it. Some of the most powerful sentences in history, speeches, poems, conversations, are short, almost abrupt, because clarity doesn't ramble, truth doesn't need padding. And power rarely comes with a shout. It's the quiet lines that leave marks. That's why you must train your voice like a sculptor trains his hands, not to create more, but to create with purpose, to carve away the unnecessary until only what matters remains. This discipline takes effort. It means resisting the urge to explain every detail, to defend every thought, to always have the last word. It means trusting that if your words are strong enough, they don't need reinforcement. The ones who speak with impact are not trying to be understood. They already understand themselves, and that understanding gives their words gravity. You feel it in the tone, in the calm, in the pauses that follow. You feel that this person doesn't speak out of nervousness or habit or noise. They speak because they have something real to give. And when they speak, it's not loud, but it lands. There is a certain elegance to restraint. It's not about being passive. It's about being deliberate, about knowing that power doesn't come from volume. It comes from value. And value is created when meaning is distilled, not diluted. So how do you make your words carry weight? You begin by noticing your patterns. How often do you talk just to avoid silence? How often do you repeat yourself hoping to sound more convincing? How often do you explain things that don't need explaining, or speak on topics you haven't thought deeply about? Notice these moments, not with shame, but with curiosity. Because each moment you catch yourself chasing words is a chance to return to presence. And presence is where weight is born. When you are here, fully, unapologetically, without distraction, your words carry your essence. Not just your ideas, not just your opinions, but your being. And that's what people respond to. They don't respond to your words. They respond to you inside your words. That's why someone can say the same thing you've said 100 times, but when they say it, it lands. It's not because their language was better, it's because their presence was deeper, their conviction more aligned, their voice rooted in something real. So stop trying to impress with clever phrasing. Speak what is true. Speak only what your chest agrees with. Speak what your silence would miss if you didn't say it. Because that's what gives words weight. Honesty, anchored in stillness. There's another layer here too, brevity. The more you learn about communication, the more you see how often people hide behind long explanations. They confuse complexity with depth, but complexity isn't impressive. It's often a signal of confusion. Brevity, when done right, is a signal of clarity. A short phrase, if it's true, can break through resistance. It can stop an argument. It can bring peace to tension. It can resolve doubt. It can shift the emotional tone of a room. That's why great communicators love short sentences. Not because they're simple, but because they're sharp. Sharp enough to pierce noise. Sharp enough to cut through emotional fog. To speak less and say more. You must fall in love with clarity. You must love words enough to let most of them go. That's where mastery lives. Not in the knowing of more words, but in the choosing of fewer. There is a quiet confidence in brevity. It says, I don't need to say everything. I just need to say this. And that kind of confidence draws people in. Because the world is full of noise, full of shouting, full of people scrambling to say something, anything, everything. But when you speak with calm, with brevity, with clarity, people feel the difference. They stop. They turn. They listen. Not because you spoke louder, but because you spoke from deeper, and the words you chose carried you. This is the art. Speak less. Say more. Let every word you speak stand on its own. Let your voice carry weight, not volume. Let silence carry your words forward, like waves. And let your presence speak louder than your lips ever could. Chapter 4. Silence is a message. Silence is not the absence of speech. It is a kind of language in itself, and those who truly master communication know that silence is one of their most powerful tools. Most people are terrified of silence. They rush to fill it with noise, with chatter, with opinions. They fear that if nothing is said, something is lost. But the truth is, in silence, everything is revealed. People show who they are in how they hold space. Silence exposes tension. It tests confidence. It draws truth to the surface. And when used with intention, it magnifies meaning in ways no words ever could. The most persuasive minds don't run from silence. They use it. They sit inside it without fear. They allow it to stretch, to settle, to breathe. Because in that stillness, their presence becomes undeniable. It says, I am not here to impress you. I am here to be real. It says, I'm not afraid to think before I speak. And that alone changes the entire energy of a conversation. A pause before a word makes that word stronger. A breath after a sentence gives it space to land. And when the room goes quiet after a powerful phrase, people feel the weight of what was just said, not because it was loud, but because it was allowed to echo. In the presence of silence, truth feels bigger. It gives room for meaning to stretch out. It lets the listener engage, respond internally, question, reflect. Silence isn't empty. It's alive. It's the soil in which understanding grows. And yet, people interrupt this soil constantly. They rush. They fill every second with explanation, justification, defense. But the most powerful statements are followed by nothing. No apology, no filler, just silence. Because confidence doesn't chase. It rests. Those who speak less and say more know this deeply. They use silence as punctuation, as intention, as proof that they are not in a hurry to be accepted. That kind of grounded stillness commands respect. A leader doesn't need to raise their voice to hold attention. A wise teacher doesn't speak endlessly to be understood. A powerful communicator knows when to let things breathe. That breath is where trust lives. That breath is where the other person feels. This matters. Silence also gives space for the listener to enter. When you stop speaking, the other person has a chance to catch up, to hear not just what you're saying, but what it means to them. That space creates connection. But when you rush, when you dump thoughts too quickly, you rob the listener of that gift. You fill them up too fast. They don't have time to feel, and if they don't feel, they don't remember. The words that last are the ones followed by quiet. There's another side to this too. Silence is a mirror. It shows the communicator who they are. If you get nervous when the room goes quiet, it's not the silence that's the problem. It's the fear underneath. The fear of not being enough without constant output. The fear of not being heard unless you're loud. But real confidence is not proven by how much you talk. It's proven by how little you need to. There's strength in restraint, there's depth in stillness, and there's honesty in the space between words. A person who knows how to hold silence is a person who knows themselves. They don't fear being misunderstood. They don't feel the need to chase understanding. They let their words rise slowly, land gently, and stand on their own. No pushing, no performance. This is why so many great speakers pause before they begin. It's not just for drama, it's because the pause gathers attention, it resets the air, it prepares the listener, and when the speaker finally does speak, every ear is open, not from force, but from presence. That pause says more than the first sentence ever could. Silence can also speak for you when words would only weaken the message. There are times when silence is the response. When someone says something meant to provoke, and you don't take the bait. When someone expects an argument, and you give them space instead. When someone is hurting, and instead of fixing or explaining, you just sit there with them. That kind of silence says, I hear you. I respect this moment. I'm not trying to control it. And that is communication at its highest level, not domination, not explanation, but alignment. To master the art of saying more with fewer words, you must fall in love with quiet, You must befriend the stillness that lives between your thoughts. You must learn to hold a room, not with your voice, but with your being. Let others scramble to prove themselves. Let them overtalk. Let them fill the air with empty noise. You, on the other hand, will be the one who waits, who listens, who speaks with clarity, then steps back and lets the message do its work. And that, more than anything, is what people remember. Not the flood of information, not the noise, but the feeling your words created in the silence that followed. In a world addicted to speaking, silence becomes sacred. When you use it wisely, you don't just communicate, you move people. And when you combine the stillness of silence with the weight of truth, you create something rare. You create moments that last, moments that echo, moments that speak louder than sound. So pause more often, speak only when your heart agrees, and let your silence be just as intentional as your speech. That's how you speak less. That's how you say more. That's how you leave a mark, without ever raising your voice. Chapter 5. The Weight of Intention. Every word you say carries weight. Whether you mean to or not, you're planting something in the mind of whoever hears you. And once that seed is there, it can't be taken back. That's why the most persuasive people in the world are not just careful with what they say, they are intentional. They don't speak to fill silence. They speak to shape it. Speaking with intention doesn't mean speaking less, just to appear wise. It means that when you do speak, every word has a reason to be there. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. You don't throw words around like loose change. You place them like currency with real value. That's what makes people lean in. That's what makes your voice feel like truth. A person who speaks with intention carries presence even before they open their mouth. You can feel it. There's a rhythm to how they talk, a weight to their pauses, a simplicity in their delivery. They don't try to impress you. They're not chasing your approval. Instead, they speak like every sentence matters, because to them it does. There's something magnetic about that kind of discipline. In a world flooded with noise, people crave precision. They're tired of the endless commentary, the over-explanation, the fake energy. They want clarity. They want honesty. They want to hear someone who speaks because they've actually thought first. And that's the power of intention. It's not just about what you say. It's about why you say it. You can speak thousands of words a day, but if none of them are aligned with your core, they vanish the moment they leave your lips. But when your voice is grounded in truth, when your intention matches your message, people feel it. They may not know why, but something inside them says, this person means it. That's the kind of communication that changes lives. Not the loudest, not the longest, but the most aligned. People often mistake passion for power. They think if they speak fast and loud, others will feel their conviction. But true conviction doesn't scream. It doesn't speed up. It slows down. It's calm. It's focused. It looks someone in the eye and speaks one clear sentence that lands like thunder. Because when your words carry real purpose, you don't need to decorate them. You just let them drop and let the silence that follows do the rest. Intention is also about restraint. Knowing when not to speak is just as powerful as knowing what to say. There are moments when silence honors the message more than noise ever could. There are conversations where listening speaks louder than talking. A pause held in empathy can be more healing than 1,000 comforting phrases. The most powerful minds know that communication is not a performance. It's a reflection, a mirror of your depth, your clarity, your discipline. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need the perfect sentence every time, but you do need to mean it. People can feel when you're bluffing. They can feel when you're rehearsing. But they can also feel when you're locked in, when your words come from a place deeper than cleverness. That's when you stop being just another voice and start being someone they remember. Intentional speech is also deeply tied to how you feel when you speak. If you're anxious, your voice will be scattered. If you're insecure, your words will try to prove something. But when you're centered, when you're clear about why you're speaking, Your voice carries a different frequency. People feel safe around it. They trust it, even if they don't agree with it. That's the kind of confidence people want to follow. You may not have all the answers. You may not be the loudest in the room. But if you're intentional, if your words are connected to something real, people will listen. And more importantly, they'll feel heard even while you're speaking. Because intention isn't just about expression, it's about connection. Intention also brings presence. It pulls you out of autopilot. You don't talk just to respond. You talk to serve something, an idea, a truth, a need, a boundary. You don't speak to fill time. You speak to fulfill a purpose. And people who live this way, speak this way, carry a kind of silent power. They're not the ones interrupting. They're not the ones dominating meetings. But when they speak, everyone stops. Because they've built a reputation. Not for being loud, but for being real. That's the kind of voice that echoes. That's the kind of voice that survives the noise. If you want to speak less but say more, you must ask yourself, not just what should I say, but what needs to be said. And even deeper, what am I trying to build with these words? What do I want them to remember? What do I want them to feel? Because when intention leads your voice, clarity follows. When you know why you're speaking, the how takes care of itself. You won't need scripts. You won't need tricks. You won't even need to be perfect. You'll just need to be aligned. That's what people trust. That's what makes a message unforgettable. And that's how the most persuasive minds in the world speak, with fewer words, more meaning, and unwavering clarity of purpose. Chapter 6. When silence speaks louder than speech. There are moments in life when silence becomes the most powerful language in the room. It doesn't need a voice, it doesn't need volume, it just is, and that presence can echo louder than the noisiest crowd. People who speak less but say more have mastered one of the rarest skills, knowing when not to speak. They've learned that silence, when used wisely, is not the absence of communication, it's the amplifier of meaning. When you pause in a conversation, the air shifts, the listener leans in. They sense something more is coming, or perhaps that what you just said carries weight. A pause gives your words time to settle. It invites others to digest instead of react. It creates room for thought, room for feeling, room for truth. But in today's world, silence often feels awkward. People rush to fill every second with sound. They talk over each other, interrupt before understanding, or fill the void with meaningless chatter. Because silence makes people feel exposed. It reveals what's really there, and most people aren't comfortable with that level of clarity. Yet the most persuasive minds embrace it. They use silence, not to withdraw, but to strengthen their words. A well-placed pause after a powerful sentence can make it unforgettable. A moment of stillness before answering a question can show depth, maturity, and control, and silence in conflict that can diffuse tension faster than defensiveness ever could. Think of a great storyteller. The ones who hold a room aren't those who talk fast. They're the ones who breathe between words. They let the story rise and fall. They know that silence isn't a threat, it's a tool. In fact, silence can be more honest than speech. People can fake their tone, mimic sincerity, and craft words carefully. But silence that reveals discomfort, or thoughtfulness, or power, you can't fake it without exposing something real. That's why in negotiation, the quietest person often has the upper hand. They don't show their cards. They don't fill the air with emotion. They wait. They let the other person speak first. And in that stillness, they gather strength, not by dominating but by observing. Silence also earns trust. When you're willing to pause, to listen fully, to hold space without rushing to respond, people feel seen. They feel respected. You're not just waiting for your turn to speak. You're actually with them. That creates safety. That builds connection. Even in conflict, silence can be disarming. Instead of reacting in the heat of the moment, choosing to pause allows emotion to settle. It shows maturity. It protects the relationship. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not a counterattack, but a quiet, "I hear you." It's important, though, to distinguish between silence that empowers and silence that avoids. Staying quiet because you're afraid to speak up is not strength, it's suppression. True mastery of silence means choosing it consciously, not hiding behind it. There is a difference between silent wisdom and silent fear. The former waits for the right moment to speak. The latter hopes never to be called on. And that difference is felt because silence, like speech, carries energy. When your silence comes from groundedness, it commands the room. People wait for you. They wonder what you're thinking. And when you finally speak, your words land with the impact of 1,000 rehearsed speeches. But when your silence comes from insecurity, it creates distance. It makes people unsure of your presence, your power, your voice. And over time, that kind of silence fades you out of the conversation entirely. To speak less, but say more, you must learn to hold your silence with confidence, not as a barrier, but as a signal. A signal that says, "I am thinking, I am listening." And when I speak, it will matter. In personal relationships, silence can speak love or pain. A quiet presence beside someone in grief says more than any comforting phrase. A shared stillness between lovers can be more intimate than any compliment. But silence can also scream when something is broken, when connection has faded, when words are no longer safe. So silence, like language, must be handled with care. In leadership, the ability to use silence is rare and invaluable. Great leaders don't need to fill every meeting with direction. They create space for others to rise. They let their teams speak, dream, challenge, and when they do speak, it's with clarity, authority, vision. Because leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about creating the conditions for the right answers to emerge, and that often requires saying less. In creativity, silence is where the best ideas are born. The mind needs stillness to think beyond what's already known. Innovation doesn't happen in noise. It happens in quiet observation, deep reflection, and long pauses no one else is willing to take. Writers, artists, thinkers, they all understand this. They protect silence like sacred ground because they know that what's not said often shapes what is. So how do you begin using silence well? Start by practicing the pause. When you feel the urge to speak just to fill space, wait, breathe, let the moment unfold, see what comes up. In conversations, try listening fully without preparing your next response. In conflict, count to 5 before replying. Let your emotions settle. And in your own mind, give yourself silent time every day. No phone, no noise, just space. You'll be amazed how much clarity surfaces when you stop drowning in sound. Remember, people forget most of what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. And often that feeling came not from what you said, but from what you chose not to. Your silence, held with purpose, can be the most eloquent language you ever speak. And that is how the great communicators do it. They don't try to say everything. They don't rush to fill silence. They respect it. They work with it. And because of that, every word they do say feels like it matters. Because it does. Chapter 7. The Power of Precision. Cutting through the noise. In a world drowning in words, the ones who rise above aren't the loudest. They're the most precise. The people who speak less, but say more, understand something the rest often miss. Words are currency, and the more you spend them carelessly, the less they're worth. Precision is not about using big vocabulary or polished grammar. It's about clarity. It's about choosing the right word, at the right moment, with the right intention. It's the ability to strip away fluff, to avoid the fog of over-explaining, and instead aim like an arrow toward the heart of the message. Most people speak to sound smart, but the persuasive minds speak to be understood. They care less about how impressive they seem, and more about how deeply their words land. Because when you communicate with precision, people don't just hear you, they feel you. And that changes everything. Precision begins with thought. Before speaking, they think. They let the idea mature in their mind, not rushing it out in fragments. They know that every word has weight, and once released, it cannot be taken back. So they hold back the unnecessary, the vague, the reactive, and they wait until the message is sharp enough to cut through confusion. This doesn't mean they always speak slowly. Some speak with fire, but even in that speed, there is focus. No wandering, no rambling. Every sentence has a place, a function, like pieces of a puzzle that reveal a picture with each line. To speak less but say more, you must fall in love with simplicity. That means resisting the temptation to sound complex when something can be said simply. It means eliminating the filler, those phrases people use to buy time or mask insecurity, like, basically I think maybe. These are the weeds that choke your message. Uproot. Think of the great speeches that moved history. They weren't built on jargon. They didn't rely on long-winded theories. They were clear, honest, and unforgettable. Why? Because they respected the listener's mind. They gave the audience what they needed, not just what the speaker wanted to say. Great communicators know how to edit themselves. They say the thing that matters most, and they cut the rest. It's not that they lack more to say, they simply know that more isn't always better. Better is better. In conversations, precision also shows respect. When you speak clearly and directly, the other person doesn't have to decode your meaning. They don't have to guess your intention. They know where you stand, what you feel, and what you want. That clarity reduces tension, builds trust, and prevents misunderstandings before they take root. In business, this is gold. Clients, teams, partners, they don't want to be impressed. They want to be understood. They want clarity, direction, assurance. And that comes from leaders who know how to get to the point without sacrificing depth. One of the best ways to practice precision is to start with writing. When you write, you're forced to slow down and structure your thoughts. You can see where you've added fluff. You can feel where the message drags or where it hits. This sharpens your thinking, and sharp thinking creates sharp speech. Another technique is summarization. After a conversation, try distilling the main idea into one sentence. If you can't, then you haven't been precise. If you can, you've struck gold. Because when you can compress something into its purest form, it becomes stronger, not weaker. This is why the most persuasive minds often speak in stories, analogies, and images. Not because they want to entertain, but because these forms carry depth in few words. A metaphor can carry a truth that paragraphs can't. A single vivid image can evoke a reaction stronger than a technical explanation. That's not manipulation, that's mastery. Precision is also rooted in presence. When you're fully present in the conversation, you're not talking on autopilot. You're listening, observing, adjusting. You're not repeating generic answers. You're crafting this response for this moment, and that makes every word feel alive. Most people don't realize how much noise they carry in their speech. They talk just to avoid silence. They speak without aligning thought and word. But those who've trained their mind to think clearly and trained their mouth to follow can cut through the noise of the world like a blade through fog. They don't use 10 words when 5 will do, and they never waste the listener's time. This doesn't make them cold, quite the opposite. Precision warms the message because it reveals care. It says, I thought about this. I chose this word for you. I'm not wasting your attention. And in a world where attention is currency, that's an act of generosity. In relationships, this is everything. How many arguments, heartbreaks, or misunderstandings are born not from intention, but from poor communication? From vague language, unclear boundaries, or emotional noise, precision can't fix everything, but it can prevent many of the wounds words create. It allows you to say, "I feel hurt," without blame, to say, "I need this," without shame, to say, "I love you," without condition, and to say no without guilt. So how do you become more precise? First, slow down your speech just enough to catch your words before they leave. Ask yourself, is this the clearest way to say what I mean? If not, revise on the spot. This takes effort, but it rewires your brain. Second, read and listen to those who speak with clarity. Study their rhythm. Notice how they transition, how they emphasize, how they avoid rambling. Let their speech become your model. Third, challenge yourself to speak in fewer words. When asked to explain something, try doing it in a single sentence. Then expand only if asked. Over time, you'll discover that most things don't need to be long, they just need to be right. And finally, develop your vocabulary, not to impress, but to express. The more words you know, the more precisely you can reflect the nuance of what you feel, think, and observe. Precision is not about sounding robotic or polished. It's about being deliberate. It's the opposite of performative communication. It's authentic, honest, sharp. Because when you master precision, your words cut deeper, land harder, stay longer. You don't need to say much. You just need to say what matters. And those who learn this rarely need to repeat themselves. Chapter 8. The Weight of Silence. Letting the pause speak. There is a moment just after someone finishes speaking, when the world holds its breath. That small pause, that fraction of silence, often carries more power than the words that came before it. In a world obsessed with noise and rapid replies, the persuasive mind knows how to wield silence like a scalpel, not to create distance, but to deepen meaning. The most magnetic communicators speak with rhythm. They don't just talk, they compose. Like music, their words have beats, rests, swells, and within that composition, silence becomes a tool. A pause is not an absence. It is presence, amplified. It allows space for the listener to feel, to process, to lean in. It says, "What I just said matters. Sit with it." People who fear silence tend to rush. They talk too much. They interrupt. They fill gaps with filler. But those who've grown comfortable with the pause, with the unspoken, know that restraint reveals confidence. It tells the room, "I don't need to rush. My presence is already enough." In the early stages of personal development, silence feels like a threat. It feels like rejection, like failure to engage. Many people associate it with awkwardness. They'll do anything to avoid it, laugh nervously, blurt out irrelevant thoughts, change topics. But those who mature emotionally begin to recognize silence as sacred space. It's where truth reveals itself, where people breathe, where clarity lives. A leader doesn't rush into an answer. They take a beat, they look, they weigh the room, the mood, the unsaid. And then they speak, not from reaction but from choice. This is not slowness, it is presence. And presence is persuasion. There is another reason silence matters. It gives others permission to speak. In conversations, the person who allows space often invites deeper honesty. When you don't interrupt, when you don't fill every gap with your own opinion, you allow the other person to unfold. They feel heard, safe, seen, and that's when trust is born. This becomes even more powerful in negotiation. The person who breaks the silence often gives away more than they intended. That moment after an offer, when nothing is said, feels unbearable to the untrained. But those who've mastered themselves sit with it. They watch the discomfort do its work, because silence reveals pressure points. And in the quiet, the truth comes out. Persuasive minds use this to their advantage, not manipulatively, but deliberately. They create emotional space. They listen for more than just the words. They listen for what wasn't said, the hesitation, the breath, the shift in energy. These are signals, often lost in rapid-fire talk. In intimate relationships, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects the emotional state of the room. Sometimes, no words are needed to show love, apology, empathy, a hand on the shoulder, a soft gaze, a shared stillness. That kind of communication transcends vocabulary. It is deeper and it is remembered longer. But this doesn't mean silence is always comfortable. No, at times it will test you. It will stretch your ability to hold space without control. But that is the point. Because silence isn't about control, it's about surrender to the moment, to the truth, to what actually wants to emerge. There is a skill called holding the pause. It means resisting the urge to jump in, to fix, to respond. When someone shares something difficult, most people rush to fill the air with advice or platitudes. But the wisest ones just stay. They nod, they breathe, they let the person finish all the way. And when they do speak, their words feel earned. If you want your words to carry more power, shorten your sentences and lengthen your silences. Let the listener catch up. Let the idea land fully before moving on. This simple act will make your communication feel richer, wiser, more grounded. People don't remember fast talkers. They remember those who made them feel something, those who gave them space to feel, those who didn't rush the moment. Even in public speaking, this principle holds true. The best speakers don't race through their points. They pause at the right moments, after a story lands, after a joke hits, after a truth is spoken. That pause allows the audience to connect, to absorb, to reflect, and that's where transformation happens. You don't need to speak every moment to lead the room. Sometimes you only need to stand tall, breathe, and say nothing at all. The presence of a person who is unafraid of silence is rare, and rare things draw attention. They create mystery, gravity. People lean in, not because they were told to, but because they want. This too is a kind of influence, one built not on volume, but on vibration. The calm one is heard, the silent one is watched, the still one is respected. And when they do speak, every word hits harder. In daily life, you can begin to practice this. Before responding to a question, pause for 2 seconds. Feel the moment. Look at the person. Let your answer come from clarity, not habit. You'll notice how differently people respond. In moments of disagreement, instead of defending yourself immediately, try breathing. Let the other person finish completely. That pause before you reply might give you a perspective you didn't have before. When emotions run high, silence is a form of leadership. It signals regulation, not avoidance. It gives both sides a chance to return to center before re-engaging. And in moments of triumph, when you could gloat, boast, prove your point, the decision to stay silent often says more about your strength than any words could. There will be people who misinterpret your silence as weakness. Let them, because you are not speaking for them. You're speaking from alignment, and silence is part of your vocabulary. You don't need to fill every gap. You don't need to explain yourself to be understood. Sometimes the most powerful move is to do nothing. Speak when you must. Say what matters. And then let it hang in the air. Let the words echo. Let the room breathe. Let silence do what only silence can. Chapter 9. When the words finally come, make them count. There's a moment in every great conversation when the atmosphere shifts. The air thickens just a little. Eyes lock, bodies lean in, and someone says something that lands. Not just heard, but felt. That's the power of a word spoken with intention, after restraint. It's not just the content, it's the weight behind it. The most persuasive people aren't necessarily the ones who speak often, but the ones who speak with impact. They speak when it matters, and when they do, you remember it, because their words don't spill. They strike. This chapter is not about how often you speak, but how deliberately. It's about knowing when you've been quiet long enough, And when it's time to finally speak, and speak with clarity, strength and focus, because when the silence has already built the tension, the words must pierce through it like an arrow, no wasted motion, no fluff. In every room, there's a moment when everyone is waiting for someone to say what needs to be said. The timid hold back, the arrogant ramble. But the powerful speaker, they step forward and say it with precision. Not many words, just the right ones. To do this, you need to train your voice not in volume but in meaning. That means every sentence must earn its place. No filler, no empty phrases, just raw, clear, honest expression. The kind that makes people nod before they even realize they're doing it. This kind of communication begins with deep listening. You don't prepare your next sentence while others are talking. You watch, you feel. You let your understanding rise like smoke slowly, and only when the moment is ripe, you open your mouth, not to dominate, but to deliver. The mistake many people make is believing they have to say more to be taken seriously. So they explain the explanation, then defend what they just explained. But every additional word dilutes the impact. The strongest ideas don't need padding, they need clarity. Think of the people whose words changed your life. A teacher, a parent, a friend, a stranger even. It wasn't their vocabulary or clever phrasing that struck you. It was the truth in what they said. And that truth came from their alignment. Their voice matched their value. Their presence matched their message. This alignment is what makes words unforgettable. When the inside matches the outside, communication becomes electric. Even if you whisper, people feel it. That's why when a quiet person speaks from that place, the room falls still. The silence that came before makes their words ring louder. You don't need to sound impressive. You need to sound real. The voice that carries the furthest is the one that doesn't try to impress. It just tells the truth, clean, and without decoration. This doesn't mean speaking like a machine. It means speaking like a human who means what they say. If you're angry, don't hide it with soft words. Channel it into clarity. If you're joyful, let it color your voice. If you're uncertain, admit it without shame. That rawness builds connection far faster than perfect language ever could. When you speak less, people start to lean in. They listen not because they're waiting for the next thing you'll say, but because they know it will matter. That trust is not built overnight. It's earned through consistency. Say little, but mean it fully, and people will begin to respect your silence as much as your voice. There's another layer to this. When you speak with restraint, you train your mind to value language differently. You stop thinking in noise. Your thoughts become cleaner. Your intentions more refined. You begin to feel which words carry weight and which are distractions. This inner clarity reflects outward. A single sentence can stop a fight. A single word can break a heart or mend one. A well-timed comment can shift the course of a meeting, a relationship, a life. But only if it's sharp. Only if it's clear. Only if it's timed with care. People who speak too often rarely realize when their voice starts to blend into the background. But those who observe, wait, and strike, they become unforgettable. Not because they were loud, but because they were necessary. In the realm of leadership, this principle is everything. Leaders who speak too much often breed chaos, but the ones who speak only when it's needed become anchors. Their voice becomes a signal. Pay attention, this matters. They don't waste that power on casual commentary. They preserve it for the pivotal moments. In intimate conversations, this same discipline creates magic. When you don't interrupt, when you wait for the whole story before replying, when you speak from a place of empathy instead of eagerness, your words become a gift. The person across from you feels valued, seen, held, and when you finally speak, they listen not just with ears but with heart. This isn't about being silent all the time. It's about choosing when to speak. And when you do, speaking in a way that doesn't try to dominate, but to deliver. Deliver peace. Deliver truth. Deliver clarity. Words have lives. Once spoken, they move through the world. They hit, echo, heal, or harm. Choose them like you would choose your steps on a narrow bridge, with care, with balance, with purpose. You don't have to have a powerful voice. You just need a powerful message, and that message is born from your lived experience, your grounded self, your truth. Speak from that place, and you'll never need to raise your voice to be heard. Let others waste energy on noise. Let them chase attention with volume. You focus on your timing, your precision, your stillness. And when it's time to speak, speak like it's the only thing that matters. Because in that moment, it is. Say less, mean more, and the world will listen. Chapter 10. When listening becomes your loudest statement. Some people never raise their voice, but the entire room bends toward them when they speak. It's not magic, it's presence. And the secret to that presence isn't always in what they say, it's in how they listen. There's a kind of listening that disarms ego, that softens walls, that changes people without saying a word. When someone feels deeply heard, they don't just respect you, they trust you, and trust is what gives your words their eventual power. This chapter isn't about silence for the sake of silence. It's about receptive silence, a kind of energetic focus that makes others feel safe enough to open up, explore, and unfold. You become a mirror, a sanctuary, a witness to their internal world, and that, in itself, is louder than most speeches. The most persuasive communicators know when to be silent, but more importantly, they know how to be silent, not distracted, not impatient, not waiting to talk, fully there. That kind of listening creates space, and in that space, truth rises, pain softens, insight grows. When you're fully present in a conversation, your eyes speak, your body speaks, your stillness speaks. You're no longer competing to be heard. You've shifted into a deeper role, the one who hears beyond the words. In a world addicted to noise, people are starving to be understood. Not advised, not fixed, just understood. If you can be the person who offers that gift, you won't need to speak much. People will feel drawn to you. And when you do speak, they'll listen because they know it's coming from someone who actually saw them. Listening like this isn't easy. It takes discipline. You'll feel the urge to interrupt, to relate, to solve. But if you can hold steady and simply witness, you give the other person the most rare experience of all, being valued without condition. It's in these moments of restraint that your voice gains weight, not through words, but through energy. You stop trying to be interesting and start being interested. You stop trying to impress and start making others feel important. That shift makes you unforgettable. People often mistake listening as passive. It's not. Real listening is a form of leadership. You guide the space without force. You allow someone to hear themselves more clearly by offering no resistance. It's in that gentle holding that you become magnetic. Think of the people you trust most, the ones you call when life feels too heavy. Are they loud? Are they filled with advice? Or are they the ones who let you fall apart without judgment? Then speak only after the dust settles. That's the kind of communicator who stays in people's hearts. In leadership, relationships, negotiations, this kind of listening becomes your greatest asset. Because you start to hear the unspoken. You begin to read what's under the surface. People reveal their fears, desires, motives, not because you ask, but because you held space long enough for it to rise. When you speak after listening like that, you don't just talk, you respond. You echo what was felt, not just what was said. And people experience you as wise, not because you know everything, but because you see them. That kind of insight doesn't come from reading books, it comes from reading people. There's another layer here. Listening also transforms you. When you quiet your need to speak, your mind sharpens, you averse more. You learn faster. You see nuance. You begin to recognize patterns, energy shifts, inconsistencies. This turns you into a communicator who sees 10 steps ahead, simply because they were quiet enough to notice. In negotiation, for example, the most powerful person is often the one who speaks last. Because they've gathered everything, they've watched every expression, caught every hesitation. When they finally speak, it's like a scalpel, precise, effective, irrefutable. This isn't manipulation. It's mindfulness, and mindfulness breeds mastery. Even in personal relationships, this kind of restraint builds intimacy. When you don't rush to fill the silence, you learn what the other person is really trying to say. You begin to hear their longing, their fear, their joy, not just through words, but through tone, timing, tension. Your presence becomes the safe place they didn't know they needed. And this presence, once established, changes your voice forever. Because now, when you speak, you don't speak to be right, you speak to connect. And connection is what people crave more than anything else. Sometimes, the best way to be heard is to not speak at all. Just listen long enough, patiently enough, deeply enough, until the moment comes where one simple sentence will do what 1,000 could not. This is what it means to speak less, but say more. You build your voice in silence. You sharpen your words in stillness. And when they finally arrive, they arrive with weight. Be the person who listens like it's the most important part of communication, because it is. And in that quiet power, your words, when they finally come, will land not just in ears, but in hearts. Chapter 11. The unspoken confidence behind every word. There's a stillness that surrounds someone who doesn't need to prove themselves. It's not pride. It's not performance. It's self-trust. And when that quiet confidence wraps itself around every word they speak, people stop to listen. Not because the voice is loud, but because it's anchored. Words carry weight when the speaker no longer depends on them for validation. That's what makes them land. It's not just what's said, it's the energy behind it. A sentence spoken from desperation trembles, but a sentence spoken from clarity, even a short one, hits like a stone dropped in still water. It ripples. Confidence isn't about knowing you're right, it's about not being shaken when you're wrong. It's standing in the middle of a disagreement and still listening. Still choosing your words carefully, still rooted in who you are without attacking who they are. This kind of confidence can't be borrowed. It must be built, brick by brick, word by word. And each time you speak from your core instead of your fear, another layer is added. It begins with knowing your worth, independent of reaction. Most people talk to control how they're perceived, but the more confident you become, the less you need to manage perception. You stop editing yourself for approval, you start expressing yourself for alignment. And the irony, that's what makes people lean in. When they sense that you're not trying to be anything other than honest, something disarms. People crave sincerity. They may be entertained by noise, but they're transformed by truth. So the less you try to perform, the more powerful your words become. The cadence of confidence is slower. It's not hurried, because it knows time belongs to it. And when you speak from this space, every pause becomes part of your message. You don't rush to fill silence. You use it. You let it breathe, letting your words settle before the next arrives. A confident speaker understands that silence is not absence, it's intention. Many people think confidence is shown through talking, but in truth, it's shown through restraint. A person who knows their value doesn't explain everything. They don't justify every opinion. They don't beg to be understood. Instead, they offer their words like a gift. Take it or leave it. It doesn't shake them either way. This isn't arrogance, it's clarity. Arrogance speaks to dominate. Clarity speaks to deliver. You can feel the difference in your own body. When you're confident, your tone softens. You don't raise your voice, you deepen it. You don't compete, you contribute. You stop speaking for effect and start speaking from essence. And people notice. In meetings, your voice might be the last to speak, but the first they remember. In relationships, you don't argue louder, you ask better. In interviews, you don't oversell, you tell the truth. And in conflict, you don't explode, you pause, reflect, and respond. All of this comes from inner work, the kind that teaches you how to listen to yourself before you speak to others. Because when you trust your own inner voice, you don't need to broadcast everything. You select, you refine, you let your message be simple, because you know it will still cut through the noise. This simplicity is power, not because it's minimal, but because it's focused. And that focus turns short sentences into sharp arrows. Confidence in communication also means letting your words stand, not padding them with apologies, not following them with disclaimers. If you say something kind, let it land. If you offer truth, let it breathe. If you express a boundary, let it stay unshaken. Watch how many times people say things like, "I'm sorry, but," or "Does that make sense?" or "I'm not sure, but," even when what they said was valid. That's not humility, that's habit. A habit born of a fear that their words don't deserve space. Break that habit. Let your voice rise from your values, not your insecurities. Let your words serve your message, not your image. Let each sentence hold its posture, not needing to lean on the next to be respected. This kind of speech transforms relationships. People start to feel something around you. Safety. They know they'll get the truth. Not the harsh kind, but the clear kind. The kind of truth that doesn't cut, it clears. Confidence isn't about saying what others can't, it's about saying what others won't, because they're still tied to fear. When you speak freely, not recklessly, you liberate everyone around you. You become the voice that says what others have only felt. You become the presence that speaks less, but reveals more. And people start to trust, not just what you say, but why you say it. Your reputation begins to grow, not as someone who talks a lot, but as someone whose words matter, and that kind of reputation travels farther than volume ever could. Every word you speak from self-trust becomes a seed. Some take root fast, others quietly grow over time, but all of them live longer than noise. So train your voice in silence, refine your message in stillness, and when the moment comes to speak, speak like someone who doesn't need permission. Speak like someone who belongs, because when confidence lives in your bones, it echoes through your words, even when you speak only a few of them. And those few are more than enough. Chapter 12, The Power of Saying Nothing and Letting the World Speak for You. There's a moment in every conversation where silence is more powerful than the next sentence, where restraint holds more weight than reaction, where what isn't said becomes louder than what is. In that moment, a person who knows the value of their voice chooses to let the silence speak, and it does, powerfully. The greatest communicators in the world all share one invisible trait. They do not need to speak to remain in control. They can command a room with their presence, influence decisions with a look, and shift the temperature of a conversation by simply pausing. Their words are rare, but never empty. They've learned the highest form of expression is restraint. To reach that level, a person must journey inward. They must confront the ego that wants to be heard. They must silence the voice that craves validation. They must master the art of waiting, of letting others reveal themselves first. There is a hidden power in letting others go first. When you speak less, others speak more. They show their thoughts, fears, insecurities, and motives. And in that space, you gain an advantage, not to manipulate, but to understand. And in understanding, you become magnetic. People start to feel something different around you. They feel like you listen, not to respond, but to see. You aren't hurried. You aren't desperate. You're present. And that presence makes your few words land with the weight of 100. This is how leaders are made, not through volume, but through gravity. A quiet gravity that draws people in because they feel safe, respected, seen. The person who speaks less doesn't waste time explaining things that don't need to be defended. They don't rush to fill awkward silences. They don't interrupt to prove a point. They don't need the final word. Why? Because their sense of identity isn't held hostage by the moment. They've cultivated depth. And depth doesn't float on the surface. Every great sentence begins with silence. Every powerful word starts in stillness. And when you become comfortable with that stillness, your entire presence shifts. You become intentional. You pause before reacting. You choose your tone. You say what needs to be said, not what your emotions urge you to say. You speak to build, not to break. And when necessary, you say nothing at all. People who always need to speak are often empty inside. Their words spill out because their silence frightens them. They're afraid of being forgotten, ignored, misunderstood. But those fears fade when you begin to trust that silence is not a void, it is a message. Your silence can set boundaries, it can show disapproval, it can create anticipation, it can reveal wisdom. And above all, it can make your words matter more when they finally arrive. There's a scene that plays out every day in the world. Someone gets angry, their voice rises, their gestures get bigger, and the other person, the one with restraint, stays calm. They nod, they breathe, and then when the storm passes, they say one sentence, just one, and it cuts through like a blade, clean and controlled. That's the art. That's the final form of communication. Precision over excess. Resonance over noise. Speaking less doesn't mean being passive. It means being deliberate. Every sentence has a purpose. Every word is a tool. You're no longer talking for approval. You're talking for impact. And the more you live this way, the more you find that your world shifts. In meetings, people turn to hear your take. In relationships, your words hold weight. In conflict, your calmness changes the temperature. In leadership, your silence becomes direction. But there's another side to this. A deeper level. As your voice becomes more refined, so does your listening. You start hearing the things people aren't saying. You feel their hesitation. You notice their contradictions. You pick up the weight behind their laughter. And in doing so, you respond to what's real, not just what's spoken. That's when communication becomes mastery. You don't just speak. You read, you feel, you interpret, and every response becomes a bridge, not a wall. People trust those who don't overtalk. They trust those who think before speaking. They lean in when someone pauses. They remember the person who spoke gently when others shouted. To speak less, but say more is not just a communication strategy. It's a life philosophy. It means you value clarity over chaos, depth over distraction, meaning over momentum. It means you are building your life like a sculptor, chiseling away the unnecessary until only the essential remains. In friendships, you speak with care. In business, you speak with clarity. In love, you speak with presence. And in your own mind, you speak with kindness. This doesn't mean you never raise your voice, but it means when you do, it's rare, and people know to listen. It doesn't mean you don't share, but when you do, it's honest, not performative. It means you know when to speak, and more importantly, when not. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, just your presence, just your calm, just your quiet certainty that you don't need to dominate to lead. And in a world full of noise, that kind of calm is revolutionary. So as you move forward, let your silence speak. Let your restraint reveal your power. Let your short sentences open wide hearts. Let your pauses carry your presence. You are not here to be the loudest in the room. You are here to be the one they remember long after the noise fades. And when you do speak, make it count. Let your words feel like home. Let them be warm, clear, and true. Let them be the kind of words that never have to be repeated because they settle deep and stay. That is how you speak less, but say more, with every single word. If this audiobook stirred something in you, if it changed the way you think about words, silence, and presence, don't let it end here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're just getting started. And remember, you don't have to speak loudly to be powerful. You don't have to say a lot to be heard. Just speak less and say more.